Darlow, Missouri. Remember the name, because once you hear what was sleeping under that gas station, you won't forget it. 3 young men walked into the night shift in October 1981 and never walked back out. No blood, no bodies, no footprints, just light burning over empty linoleum, coffee cooling by the minute, and a silence so complete it feels like the building itself is holding its breath. And the worst part isn't that they vanished. It's what waited beneath them, listening. It was cold for early October, not enough for heavy coats, but enough to make breath turn thin in the air when they zipped their jackets and clocked in at the Gulf Station on Route 6. If you've ever driven past Darlow, you know the place I'm talking about. A small-town service island where you could fill your tank, grab a pack of smokes, and sit for a minute with the radio low. Quiet, predictable. And that's where the story begins, because that's how Darlow likes to make you feel. Quiet, predictable, right until it doesn't. Their names matter, because names are what remain when numbers lie. David Rohr was 29, the shift lead, quiet and dependable, the kind of man who never left until open and never missed a dentist appointment. He'd been at that Gulf station nearly 5 years. Tommy Geller was 20, a college dropout saving for his own car and working nights to avoid the friction at home. Fast with a joke, quick with a glance over his shoulder, he kept people at arm's length, which is how a lot of small-town boys learn to breathe. And Mark Dunley, 25, a former mechanic who'd landed the job less than a month earlier. Soft-spoken, new in town, paid cash for a room above the old post office. No criminal records. No known enemies. No reason to vanish. They clocked in around 10 p.m. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. Morning arrived like any other. The day's shift pulled up just after 6 and stopped on the threshold with their keys half raised. Lights still on, register drawer pulled open with every dollar still inside, coffee pot half full, a cradle of used paper cups sagging in the trash. On the coat rack hung 3 jackets waiting for the shoulders that never slid back into them. On the counter, paychecks from the day before unopened. Out back, David's truck sat where he'd left it, tires brand new, seat cold. Inside, there was no broken glass, no forced entry, no discarded struggle. That's the lie that small-town quiet likes to tell you, that silence means safety. It doesn't. Sometimes it means someone made sure you would never hear what really happened. By 8 a.m., Darlow police were on site. One officer took a long look, thumbed his radio, and suggested what was easiest to say and hardest to take. Maybe it was a walk-off, maybe a prank, maybe 3 guys did something dumb. Families pushed back hard. David's father arrived furious, listing details like beads on a rosary. Dentist appointment tomorrow. New tires yesterday. Never leaves the register open, not ever. Tommy's mother rolled in already crying, repeating, he's not the kind of boy who runs. Like the words could anchor him in place. The station owner, Jack Kessler, unlocked the office and checked the records. No money missing, no parts, no fuel unaccounted for. Only one thing stuck sideways in his mind. The back storage door, always kept bolted, was unlatched. Not broken, just open. The initial report read the way small-town reports read, when nobody wants to be the first on record with the worst idea. 3 adult males, no evidence of struggle, no reason to believe foul play. Number 911 activity in the night. The case was marked voluntary disappearance and handed to the sheriff's office for follow-up. If you lived in places like Darlow, you know what that phrase often means. It means nobody follows. But for a few days, people did talk. The last confirmed customer was a delivery driver named John Price, who passed through around 1:40 a.m. He paid cash, spoke briefly with a younger man who seemed polite and distracted, and noticed the kid kept glancing toward the back like he expected someone to come out. Later, when shown a photo, Price pointed to Tommy. That's the guy, he said. The lights were still on when Price rolled away. There was also a rumor scribbled into the margins of a police file, an unsigned statement, barely legible, about a pickup truck parked in the back lot with its lights off shortly before 2 a.m. A drive-by glance on Route 6. Nobody followed up, because in small towns, stories die fast when there's nothing new to tell. A week in, Deputy Glenn Mercer, a young officer with 3 years in and eyes that didn't like neat boxes, was assigned the case. He did the work you're supposed to do. Interviews, family statements, bank checks, DMV records. Nothing. No withdrawals. No bags packed. No calls from the payphone. The pump logs were clean. 2 nights of light rain had turned the back lot to smudge gravel, and footprints meant nothing. Mercer filed his first report with a note. No sign of foul play, but doesn't feel like a voluntary disappearance. Recommend further review. A week later, he was pulled off the case, replaced by a senior investigator who interviewed the station owner once and concluded the men had likely chosen to leave their lives behind. The official file closed itself like a tired eye. Mercer kept some notes. Years later, in the bottom of a box, someone would find a single line scrawled in the margin. Feels like something under the surface here. Something we weren't supposed to find. 2 days after the disappearances, a statement that never made the official report surfaced in another box. A 17-year-old named Calvin Drake had been outside the all-night diner up the road waiting for a friend's shift to end when he noticed a man, tall guy, wearing a dark leather coat, just standing by the bushes behind the station. Not drunk, not lost, just watching. Drake saw him twice, around 1:15 a.m. and again near 1:50, moving behind the garage toward the back. Walked with a purpose, Drake wrote. No sketch was made. No background check. In the margin, someone wrote, witness underage, not sure of accuracy. No follow-up requested. But the location Drake described matters. The backlot. The same ground where a steel hatch would be discovered 40 years later. 12 days after the 3 men vanished. The storage shed behind the station caught fire at about 4 a.m. A cruiser on patrol noticed the smoke and called it in. The shed was nothing, with frame under a metal roof, filled with old signage and bulk cleaning tanks. But the fire burned hot and fast and ate everything. It didn't spread to the main building, but by sunrise the shed was ash and twisted sheet. What stood out was what wasn't there. An earlier inspection report said the shed had been recently used to store boxes of old employee files, equipment logs, and mechanical reports, records going back a decade, which the manager had moved there during a cleanup and never gotten around to shredding. Gone. The fire marshal listed the cause as undetermined. No accelerants were found, but responders noted 3 details that wouldn't sit right. The burn was too hot for a shed with so little inside. The door latch had been broken before the fire, not melted by heat, and a neighbor mentioned a dark-colored vehicle parked by the back fence about an hour before anyone saw flames. No one followed up. The incident got filed under non-criminal property loss, not even attached to the disappearance case. The timing felt surgical. Not a day or 2 later, but nearly 2 weeks, long enough for the town to stop looking. If you're listening to me right now, take this in slowly. Somebody wasn't trying to start a fire. They were trying to end a paper trail. After that, the town moved on the way towns do. The station changed hands and failed, then closed in '98 after a costly EPA inspection for tank leakage. The property kept showing up on auction notices and kept getting pulled for pending zoning review. It just sat there, boarded windows behind a canopy skeleton and oil-stained concrete, like a husk that still remembered being a body. And the families were left with the worst version of grief, the one that won't tell you if it has ended. Decades passed. That should have been the end. It wasn't. In the summer of 2021, a demolition crew arrived to clear the slab for a hardware chain that wanted more parking. Day 3, one of the backhoes hit something solid. It wasn't a tank. It wasn't a support block. As they hosed dirt away, the outline of a reinforced hatch rose out of ground. Thick steel bolts at the frame, a handle fused by rust. You can feel the temperature drop in these moments, even standing in full sun. By law, they reported it. By morning, the sheriff's department had the site taped and the hatch ringed in equipment. When they finally cut the bolts and pried the hinges, what lay beneath wasn't a utility room, and it wasn't storage. It was a chamber, bare concrete walls. A single bulb hanger dangling dead from the ceiling. And in a far corner, something that turned the air thin. 3 worn gas station name tags, each a different name, each backed by a rusted stain where it had once pinned a cloth that was no longer there. No bodies were recovered, but the room said it plainly without a mouth. Someone had been down here. 3 someones. And they hadn't come back out. This is where another name enters the story. Elliot Crane had left Missouri in the late 90s, returned only for his mother's funeral and to sell the last of the family property, and had no plans to come back. Then a voicemail from his cousin Wendy. "Elliot, I know you're not interested in this kind of thing anymore, but I thought you should hear it from me. They found something under the old Gulf station, the one where Uncle David worked. I think it's about what happened to him." David was Elliot's mother's brother. In 1981, Elliot was 6. Too young to understand why his mom cried every night, or why his grandfather turned to stone, or why the family never spoke David's name again. He grew up to be a reporter, crime, then long form, and the kind of quiet true crime that older audiences sink into. He made a living by asking questions no one wanted asked. Now, one of those questions had his last name in it. He pulled into Darlow at dusk. The town was mostly the same. 2-stoplight downtown, the dusty diner on 5th Street. His late aunt's house, David's sister's, held out a long hug and a look that didn't blink. She didn't bother with small talk. "It's real, Elliot. The sheriff's people said there was a room down there under the gas station. They won't say more, but one of the guys on the crew called my son-in-law. Said there were name tags down there. 3 of them. One said, David, just David. The word David can feel like a weight if you've spent 4 decades not allowed to say it." That night, Elliot walked the house like an animal checking fences. The creaks were new and the quiet different. In the attic, behind a collapsed bed frame, he found a crate with David scrawled in faded black marker. Inside, papers, photographs, a Gulf uniform patch, and a warm brown envelope labeled, "If anything happens to me." There was no letter, just a cassette in a plastic case marked October 6, and behind it a black and white photo. 3 men in front of the pumps, smiling. David in the middle. The other 2 faces unfamiliar. On the back, in David's hand, "Last shift before all changes." He didn't know it yet, but that tape would change everything he thought he knew about 1981, and about what waited underground. Elliot signed a liability waiver, and got temporary access to the site. In daylight, the station looked smaller than the ghost in his head. The canopy had collapsed to a rusted frame. Weeds bruised through every crack. Plywood shuttered the windows. He stood with the hum of power lines and the far throb of a truck and the particular silence of a place that has seen too much. Behind the building, a steel hatch, new, bolted, sat over the opening the crew had found. He lifted it with effort. The hinges screamed the way metal screams when it remembers. 10 or 12 feet down, a ladder bolted to a concrete wall stepped into a room the size of a small office. The air was cold and dry with a dust that carries age like a taste. His light moved across bare walls and old metal anchors near the floor that might once have held shelves or might have held something you wish you never needed to hold. In a clear evidence bag, a Gulf name tag, faded, bent, rust at the pin, a digital watch frozen at 1:56 a.m., a chipped lighter stamped show me state. If you've ever lost someone, you know this is the kind of thing that breaks you. Not bones or blood, but the small stupid objects still warm with the life that held them. Near the ladder, under grime, a number written in black marker. For there were 3 missing men. So who or what was the 4th? The back wall held another detail, a cluster of deliberate scratch marks, for parallel tallies and a 5th crossing them. Someone at some time counted something here. You can feel a room thicken when you notice what has been asked to hold. The watch at 1:56 nagged him. He made a note to compare it against any surviving footage. He checked out the old tapes too. In an attic office, he listened to a box archive cassette labeled Jack Kessler, October 8, 1981. State your name for the record. Jack Kessler. I run the Gulf on Route 6. Tell us what you found when you arrived that morning. Everything was normal. Too normal. Register was open. Keys were where they should have been. Coffee still warm. Nobody in sight. Anything out of place? Yeah. The back storage door was unlatched. We don't leave it that way ever. Was anything missing? Number. That's what was strange. Everything was there except the people. Then Kessler leaned closer, voice lower, almost embarrassed by the thing he was about to admit. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but there's always been something weird about that property. I took over the station in '74. First winter we were here. The sump pump backed up after freeze, flooded half the back room. When we went to clear it, we found a patch of concrete that didn't match the rest of the slab, like it had been poured later. Didn't think much of it. Now I do. A note on the case read, "Follow-up interview canceled. Subject requested no further contact." From the county records warehouse, Elliot signed out a small metal reel labeled Gulf Station. October 1981, CM 3-inch, 8mm silent film, the kind of motion detection camera used before security went digital. Frame by frame, the back lot rolled by ingrain and shadow. Midnight to just after 2 a.m., nothing but the slow swing of light and the long blink of passing trucks on the highway. Then, just after 1:50, a figure edged into frame. Male, broad-shouldered, dark clothing. He stood facing the back of the building, unmoving, like a man listening through a door. 30 seconds. Gone. Minutes later, a second figure appeared from a different angle, crouched low along the gravel path behind the station, then dipped into what Elliot froze. The shadow of a recess in the ground. Not a random hole. The kind you fit a hatch over. The film sputtered to a stop at 2:04. No exits. No returns. Just the feeling you get when a piece of evidence tells you what no one wanted to believe, that the ground eats too. He found more. In the planning office, a thin folder where a thick one should have been, and at the bottom, a half-torn invoice. September 1979. Cement delivery. Reinforced grade. Location, rear lot. Work order 781, restrict. No business name. No signature. Just a phone number that led to a defunct contracting firm. Thompson and Ellis. Dissolved after a partner was convicted of illegal dumping. Restrict. A job code or a warning label. In the Darlow Water Board archives, with a retired utility man named Dennis Pike, Elliot unrolled a 1952 blueprint of storm drains beneath the property. Old systems in old towns, hand-dug and half-documented. Running directly under what would become the Gulf Station was a secondary storm access, marked closed 1964. And this is the word that freezes time in your throat, unsealed. 2 vertical vents were marked sealed, no date, and east of the main building footprint, faint in red pencil and not part of any official legend, a circle with letters written in the careful panic of someone trying to warn without getting fired. Do not dig. That's not a utility mark, Dennis said. That's contractor code. Someone found something they weren't supposed to and marked it quietly. If you're counting timelines with me, understand what this means. Whatever sat beneath that station predated the station. Somebody knew. They built over it anyway. But the proof that the story hadn't ended in 1981 was waiting in a voice that had never been heard. The cassette from the attic, October 6th, wasn't a joke, and it wasn't paranoid. Elliot took it to an audio lab in Springfield. The machine clunked the way old machines do when they prepare to tell you the truth. Static. Then a voice, young, nervous, breath running ahead of the mouth. Tommy Geller. Okay, this should be rolling now. Dave, if you find this, don't tell Jack. All right, just listen. The words fell out in a rush. We were checking the storage drain last night after the rain. The one behind the back lot. Mark thinks there's a crawl space under it, but it's sealed. We found some old hinges, maybe a panel, but the concrete's weird. Looks newer than the rest, like it was patched over. Anyway, we're gonna take another look tonight. If I'm wrong, fine. I'll owe you a beer. But if I'm not, if there's something down there, I just want on record that I said something. Shuffling. Mark's been jumpy all day. Keeps saying he heard a hum like a generator. But there's nothing back there. Nothing we can see anyway. The tape hissed, then settled. If we're not back by sunrise, maybe check under the slab. Click. If you're listening with the lights off, you can feel the temperature go down right here. That wasn't a prank. It was a warning. There was another voice Elliot needed, Georgia Lane, the retired bus driver who'd called the station close to midnight asking if she'd left her purse there. In her kitchen, she folded her hands and spoke like someone who has decided telling the truth is a form of apology. I never told the cops everything, she said. Didn't want to seem crazy. When she called, a man answered. Not a kid. Deep voice, didn't say his name. I asked about my purse, and he said, "We haven't seen anything, ma'am, but I'll keep an eye out." Very polite, but distant. Then I heard something in the background, a banging noise like metal on metal. Then a voice, not close to the phone, farther off, sounded scared. It said, "Don't," and then the line clicked. Elliot asked if she was sure it wasn't static. Georgia shook her head. "No, honey." It was a man's voice. Real, frantic, like he was about to say something important. And then it cut out like someone hung up for him. She waited for a call back. It never came. She told the police she'd heard noise, not the voice. Figured it wouldn't matter. But it mattered, because it meant at least one of those men was still alive underneath while someone else stood upstairs answering the phone. Do you understand what that implies? They didn't vanish into thin air. They were still there. The ground had a mouth. Back in the attic box, Elliot found a receipt dated October 2nd, 1981, from Anderson Supply. Paid cash for one flashlight, one can of WD-40, and a hatch hook and hinge kit. On the back, in David's handwriting, sharp and fast, black ballpoint, were instructions for turns left from light. Tap twice, then push. 12 in for down. Numbers lie. Names don't. If it's not shut, don't go in. A friend who had once done Cold War code work examined it and said, "This isn't a cipher. It's a physical sequence. Left turns, taps, a push, likely a mechanical entry. 12 in for down, measurements in inches. As for the last line, he circled it. That's a warning. He returned to the chamber at night because there are some jobs the sun makes harder. Starting at the ladder and taking the ceiling light as a reference point, Elliot turned left, counted his steps, crouched to tap the wall twice. Dull and solid. He dropped to his knees, measured 12 inches in from the corner, and 4 down. There it was, a small rusted handle fused concrete, nearly invisible. The first pull did nothing. The second tore a metallic click out of the wall. The panel shifted. A vent size crawl opened, pitching downward. The air that exhaled was stale, dry, preserved like the inside of a sealed jar. He crawled, flashlight trembling despite his grip, the passage bending once and then again, the slope sharpening, the taste of dust going bitter. Concrete faded to raw earth. The beam cut through a fog of motes, but there was no drip, no animal smell, no rot, just silence with weight. The crawl opened into a larger void. Not a room exactly, and not a tunnel. Something half-carved and half-grown. Dirt floor hard-packed by time and intention. The walls bore scratches, hundreds, horizontal, frantic, made by metal dulled to uselessness. In one corner lay a rusted pry bar, with its bite bent. Against the far wall, a half-collapsed wooden bunk and a metal crate half-buried, and a glass bottle shattered long ago. In the center, a circular patch of earth, perfectly smooth and unnaturally dark, as if the soil had been heated or compacted by a pressure that was not gravity. Elliot knelt and played the light across it. Something glinted. A small, cracked ID badge still clipped to a rusted chain, marked Dunley. This wasn't just where the men had passed through. This was where they had been kept. He didn't speak. There was no one to hear. He climbed out at sunrise and drove to the library before the county clerk had finished her first cup. He wanted to know if Darlow had ever seen anything like this. In a box labeled Miscellaneous Civil Incidents, he found a statement dated July 12, 1953, from a rail maintenance worker named Frank Barron. During a routine inspection near the west edge of town, he fell nearly 6 feet into an unmarked pit concealed under brush and scrap lumber. Inside, he said, was a stone-walled chamber, empty but too precise to be natural. The county surveyor dismissed it as a collapsed foundation from an old smokehouse. Barron wasn't satisfied. A week later, he filed a handwritten addendum. Too deep for a smokehouse. Walls were smooth. Looked like someone made it for keeping things in or keeping things out. The site was filled in quietly later that month. No photos. No investigation. Elliot mapped the 1953 location against modern Darlow. It sat roughly half a mile from the Gulf Station, in a line that would pass through 3 residential lots, a small wooded stretch, and the old grain co-op building shuttered since 1971 for structural instability. 3 sealed spaces across 3 decades. The same underground pattern. Whatever lived beneath the gas station didn't start there. He checked school records because Mercer had mentioned something that didn't make sense until it did. The week the men vanished, the high school ran a fire drill in the middle of the night. No one talked about it. In the October 1981 records, there was an after-hours emergency evacuation drill on October 6th, the night before the disappearances at 1:30 a.m. No explanation. Every student and staff member marked present. Curiously, one student was excused minutes before it began. Timothy Kessler. Kessler, as in Jack Kessler, the station manager. Timothy was 17, good grades, listed as part-time at Gulf Station, Route 6. Reason for early release, family matter. So, the manager's son left a late-night school drill early the night before the crew planned to open a hatch in the back lot. Less than 24 hours later, all 3 men were gone. Elliot drove to the Kessler residence, a modest ranch at the edge of town, yard trimmed too perfectly to be casual. The porch light was on in daylight, a small-town quirk or an old man's habit. Rumor had it that Jack had a stroke in the mid-2000s and hadn't spoken publicly since. Elliot wasn't there for Jack. He was there for Timothy, now in his 60s. A quiet man opened the door, lean, slow by years, eyes heavy with the kind of weight you don't get from work. Elliot said, "I'm David Rohr's nephew." The name hit and left a mark. Timothy didn't invite him in, but he didn't close the door. "You're digging up something that never should have been uncovered," he said flatly. "There's a reason the station was buried, a reason people moved on." 3 men didn't move on, Elliot said. Timothy's eyes darkened. "Because they went where they shouldn't have, and my father tried to keep it sealed." "Did he know about the chamber?" Elliot asked. Timothy shook his head. "He didn't build it, but he knew it was there, just like the others did." "You think you're the first one who's tried to open that hatch?" "You're not. They tried before in 71, in 64. It never ends well." "What happened that night?" Elliot asked. Timothy paused long enough for the air to press in. He gave them a chance to walk away. They didn't take it. Then he closed the door. That evening, an envelope slid into Elliot's orbit at his aunt's house. No return address. His name on the front in thin black capitals. Inside, a photocopy of police memo stamped confidential, dated October 20th, 1981, 13 days after the disappearances. Internal review of Gulf Station case. Field summary from Lieutenant Monroe. Paragraph 1. The third inspection of the site yielded no new evidence. The original entry chamber confirmed. No further search conducted beyond ground level. Concerns raised by Deputy Mercer regarding subterranean layout dismissed. Recommendation. Full closure. Reclassify as unexplained disappearance. Paragraph 2. Request from Kessler MGR to delay demolition of rear lot denied. Alternate solution proposed by code enforcement. Seal existing chamber with reinforced concrete. No press release and permanent transfer of deed to Darlow County. Internal note suggests this was a preferred method to discourage urban exploration and future liability. That's not ignorance. That's intent. They debated the problem and chose cement. In the surveyor's blueprints preceding the station's construction in 1970, another ghost hid in margins, a disconnected segment of storm tunnel. No entrance, no exit, just a blank rectangular void labeled Cavity DNR 2, with a handwritten note. No access, no record of purpose. If you've been following along, you already know what Elliot was thinking. The sealed chamber wasn't the only hidden room. East of the original slab, 20 feet down, lay a second structure that had never been mapped to surface level. No crawl, no hatch, unless you knew where to look. He returned to the site at night with one goal. It took 4 hours of probing distances and rereading blueprints by headlamp glow before he heard it. The hollow echo under his boot behind the rusted support post of the collapsed pump canopy. He scraped back dirt to reveal a steel plate fuse of the ground. No visible hinges, no handle, just a seam. The metal looked untouched in 40 years. Beneath it, if the map was right, was a room they decided no one should ever see. He pried until the barn lever in his hand felt welded to bone. At 3 a.m., the plate gave. The air that climbed out wasn't stale. It had weight, like a hell breath. The ladder descended into a space that wasn't hand-poured or dirt-cut. Smooth walls lined with thin metal ribs. Not military, not commercial. Custom. The lower chamber was larger, 20 feet wide, 10 high, dust on the floor so even you could see where no one had walked. Across that dust, against the far wall, a chair sat bolted to the floor with restraint cuffs hanging from both arms and a spotlight overhead. If you've been in enough basements, you know the difference between a medical chair and a police chair, and a chair that's meant to keep something from forgetting it's not supposed to stand up. Beside it, a narrow table with a notebook, pages fused by time and moisture, one legible. Do not speak to it. Do not answer. If it remembers your name, leave immediately. Elliot's light trembled. Behind the chair, etched into the metal 3 letters, D.R. David Rohr. And beneath, faint and almost like an afterthought, we weren't alone. He didn't sleep that night. He went back to the cassette because there was still one thing he hadn't done. Flip to side B. He'd assumed it was blank. Auto-flip leftovers were common. In the lab, the tape woke with a skitter and a breath. Movement. Footsteps. 3 sets by the sound, muffled and hollow the way sound gets when it has to learn to move without air. Tommy again. Okay, we're at the hatch. Mark's gonna pop it. David's got the flashlight. A metal clang. The scrape of a latch. Then footsteps that sounded like men walking into their own absence. David. A voice announced farther off. There's something carved into the wall. I can't make it out. Looks fresh. Then Tommy, closer and breathing different. This place is bigger than it looks. The floor is different. Smoother concrete, maybe. Hold on. Mark's voice cut in low and shaken. It's not empty. The audio bled into a warble. Underneath the warble, a rhythmic clicking like a machine. Try to learn to speak. Tommy hissed, "Shut up. Shut up. Do you hear that, David? I think it's coming from the other side of the wall." And then a voice that wasn't theirs, a whisper that sounded mechanical and human, in the worst possible ratio. "Did you come back for me?" Soft, repeated twice. A crash, the kind that sounds like panic tripping over metal, shouts, movement, and then static swallowed the room. He played it again and again, and every time, the question came like cold breath behind the ear. "Did you come back for me?" Not a threat, a question, which is worse, because a question means it knows how to wait. Back in the second chamber, the notebook's few salvageable pages offered a map of someone else's fear. It responds to memory triggers, names, places, smells. Once it starts speaking, you must not engage. Acknowledgement accelerates cognition. Another page, handwriting shakier. It mimics the voices of people it hears. It doesn't understand death. It keeps asking about the others. It thinks they're still here. Piece by piece, the story assembled itself. They hadn't just opened a sealed room. They had woken something up, something left behind or buried or contained. And when they answered, even once, it learned. Elliot told Mercer everything. The retired deputy listened, then opened a drawer and laid down a photograph, a grainy black and white taken during the station's foundation dig in 1970. Workers in hard hats, rebar climbing from the pit. At the bottom edge, barely visible but cruel once you see it, a hatch already set into earth long before the slab. "I tried to show this to the captain back then," Mercer said. "He said it was a trick of the light. Said I needed a break." Back at the motel, Elliot spread the photos and maps and tapes out on the bed and asked himself out loud, into his recorder, the only 3 questions that matter in stories like this. What happens if I release this? What happens if I don't? What would David have done? There isn't a right answer. There's only who has to live with which consequences. He left Darlow the next morning. Not because he wanted to, but because he understood that sometimes you protect the living by refusing to give the dead exactly what they're asking for. He left the originals with Mercer and mailed a copy set to a journalist in Chicago a note. "If I don't reach out in 30 days, publish everything as is." He kept a 3rd set with him. 2 weeks later, at a roadside motel near the Arkansas border, he recorded what would be his last log. October 18th, 2021. I've gone as far as I can. The tape is real. The chambers are real. And whatever they found down there, it's still sealed. I don't know if it's alive. I don't even know if it was ever technically human. But it remembered David's name. And that means it remembers others. If you're hearing this, don't go looking. Don't dig it up. Don't try to prove me right. Because some truths don't want to be uncovered. Some are just waiting. The recording ends there. No signature. No wrap-up. Just room tone, and if you turn the volume up high enough and hold your breath just right, a whisper too thin to parse. Some people swear it says, "Did you come back for me?" 40 years ago, 3 men vanished without a trace, and what they may have uncovered beneath that gas station was never meant to be found. The evidence was buried, the chamber was sealed, and the few who knew chose silence over answers. But now the cracks are back. If what they heard down there was real, if something was speaking, then we have to ask, how many others knew? How many rooms like this still sleep? And what happens when somebody somewhere decides it's their turn to open one? I'll leave you with this. Along the back wall of that first chamber were tally marks for lines in the 5th cross-through, carved so hard the concrete flaked. On the latter wall, the number 4 in black marker. Maybe it was a count of days, maybe of men, or maybe of attempts. Names don't lie. Numbers can. But someone down there tried to make sure you'd remember both. If you ever find yourself standing on an old slab in a town that doesn't like to talk, and you see a patch of concrete that looks like it came later, and you feel the hair on your arms rise for no weather at all, walk away. Some doors aren't meant to open from our side. Some voices don't belong in the air. And Darlow, Missouri, if you pass through, keep your radio low and your windows up. If the ground hums, if you hear that soft mechanical whisper in the spaces between your heartbeat, don't answer it. Don't say your name. Don't ask it anything at all. Because if it remembers your name, you'll never stop wondering what it wants you to come back for.